What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be doing a pretty in-the-weeds example of dependency injection in your iOS apps using Swift. So we're going to build the app you see here. It doesn't do too much. All we do is actually fetch some data and show this controller here, but the actual meat of this is the code to fetch the data and to present this controller are completely deduped from each other. They're separate targets, separate modules, and we're going to take a look at how to inject the dependency of fetching the data into the dependency which renders the UI. So if that makes sense, if you're into that, drop a like down below, hit subscribe while you're at it, and let's talk about some dependency injection in Swift. All right, let's go ahead and get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project. We're going to stick with the app template under iOS, and I'm going to go ahead and call this project DI for dependency injection. Make sure your language is Swift, your lifecycle UI kit, and your interface is storyboard. Go ahead and continue, save it wherever you'd like. I'll toss it onto my desktop here. And first things first, let's talk about how we're going to be setting up this project since it directly correlates to injecting dependencies. So the dependency that we're going to have, or the two dependencies in general that we're going to have in this project, one of them is going to be responsible for the user interface, and the other one is going to be responsible for actually going and getting some data via an API call. So call it a network manager type dependency. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and do first in our view controller here is we're just going to add a button on the screen, and when we tap on that button, we're going to want to present the subsequent view controller, which is going to show the list of elements. So I'm going to first paste this URL here. It is a API endpoint to get a list of courses. And let's go ahead and add a button here. I'm not going to make it too fancy by any means, but just to get something on our UI to get started with. So we'll go ahead and just do this programmatically. So I'll say 250 wide, maybe 50 tall. I'm going to go ahead and say view, add subview this button, and let's just make this button look a tad bit nicer. So we're going to go ahead and set a background color to it. We'll set it to be system blue. Going to also go ahead and give it a title. We'll go ahead and say tap me. This is going to be normal, and let's also go ahead and center it. I'm going to say button.center is going to be view.center, and finally I'm going to set the title color as well, since I think it is blue out of the box. So we're going to go ahead and say white and for normal. And let's go ahead and select a simulator up here. I'm going to go with the 12 Pro Max. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And we'll continue with the actual dependency injection piece of this video. So essentially what we want to do is when I tap on the button, we're going to show another view controller, which is going to show us a list of elements, in this case courses. That's going to be in one particular target, but we're going to want a dependency on an object that can actually go and fetch that data set for us. So while our simulator decides to take its time, let's talk about actually setting up that code. So what we want to do is we actually want to create two targets. So I'm going to come up here in the toolbar and go to File, New, and create a target here. And we're going to want to stick with under iOS. We're going to go all the way down, and we're going to either want to pick a framework or a static library. I'm going to stick with framework. And the first thing we're going to do here is call this one our API kit. Kit is pretty similar to how Apple names their frameworks, so like UI kit, etc., etc. So we'll call this API kit. Generally, the defaults here, including tests, embedding it in the project, and the language are correct. So you can go ahead and continue. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see a new folder here, very similar to what we've got up above. We're not going to actually have any files in here, so let's go ahead and create a new file in here. It's going to be a blank Swift file. We're going to go ahead and call it maybe API caller. And we're going to basically write a function in here which is capable of, fetching our collection of course names. So we're going to create public func API, or public class, I should say. Public class API caller, and it's going to be a shared instance of it because there's really no need for there to be multiple instances of this. We'll go ahead and do that. We're going to privatize the initializer since everyone's going to be using the static instance. And the reason all this stuff needs to be public is because we're going to be importing this in other modules, in this case into our main app, which is DI here. So bear with me, this will all make sense momentarily. Now we're going to have a public function on this, and what this is going to do is fetch course names. Now let's go ahead and implement this. It's going to be a very simple API call. So first things first, you guys know the drill. We're going to go ahead and create a URL to the API endpoint. Going to go ahead and paste in what I copied earlier prior to the video. And we're also going to go ahead and write out the actual task here. So the task is going to be URL session shared, and it's going to be a data task with a URL and callback. So the one that we want to use is this one here. Going to pass in said URL. This will give us some data back. We're going to ignore the response, and we're going to validate that there is no error. So here we'll go ahead and unwrap that data. We'll verify that the error is nil. And we'll go ahead and at this point we would want to decode our JSON. Now before we continue and wrap this piece up, let's also go ahead and say task.resume. That's how we kick off our API call. And the next thing we want to do is create a target which is going to house a view controller that's going to render this list. It's just going to have a table view on a view basically, and that's what we'll present from here. So just like we created API kit, let's go ahead and create one more target, and this is going to be called something else kit. So we'll go to File, New Targets, and we're going to go once again down to the framework, and I'm going to go ahead and call this My App UI Kit just to not conflict with Apple's UI Kit. And inside of this, we're basically going to add any of the user interface materials for our application. So we'll go ahead and add a new file in here, and it's going to be a Cocoa Touch class. It'll be a UI view controller. And we're going to go ahead and call this a courses view controller since that's what it's going to be rendering. Go ahead and create it just like that. And essentially on here, we want to implement a table view. Now you might be wondering, how the heck does this all tie into dependency injection? The reason this all ties into dependency injection is because this view controller will need to have a dependency on this API kit, specifically the API caller, to go and fetch the data. However, we don't want to actually link the API kit to this My App UI kit. What we rather want to do is we want to leverage dependency injection to pass in the functionality from API kit that we need into the My App UI kits. And I just realized this view controller should reside in here. So make sure you drag that to the correct folder, and in the right panel, make sure that this view controller is a part of My App UI kits. So let's go ahead and set that up. So back in our view controller, in the main app target, what we want to do is we want to attach a handler to this button such that when we tap it, we're going to present the courses view controller. So we're going to go ahead and create a function. It's going to be a selector, of course. We're going to say did tap button, just like that. We're going to go ahead and also say here the event is touch up inside. And down here, we're going to stick that function. So we'll say private func. And now to actually leverage that My App UI kit, we want to go ahead and import it here. So I'm going to go ahead and say import My App UI kit, pops up just like that. And from that, we're going to grab that view controller, which we have called courses view controller. If it doesn't pop up for you for any reason, just go ahead and create it manually. Sometimes Xcode just loves to be dumb. Once you go ahead and do a Command B, you'll see that everything will build and it'll syntax highlight. And the next thing we're going to do is simply say present VC animated true, just like that. So let's talk about actually injecting the dependency from the API kit. So we're also going to want to import API kit here. So I'm going to say import API kits. And API kit has an object that's capable of fetching the particular data that we need, which in this case is a list of the actual courses. So let's see where I actually stuck that. So here we have the test target. We don't want that. We put it in API caller. So let's go ahead and round this out too. So this function, which is going to fetch course names, should probably take a completion handler, a callback. And this is going to be an escaping callback, is going to return to us a collection of strings, and the actual closure returns void. So if we don't have a valid URL, we're going to say return an empty collection. If we don't have data for any reason, we're going to once again say return an empty collection. And finally, down here, what we're going to go ahead and do is we want to actually decode the JSON and return that in the format of an array of strings. So if we do get an error here, we're going to go ahead and say once again return an empty collection. And here we're going to go ahead and say the result is going to be JSON serialization, and we want to go ahead and get a JSON object with the data allowing fragments, and this will basically give you just the raw JSON out, and we're going to go ahead and print out that JSON, and then we're going to have to transform it into an array of strings. And this is the piece where we're actually going to pass in this API caller into this view controller without actually passing it in. And I know that statement sounds confusing, so bear with me here. So what we're going to go ahead and do inside of the view controller, courses view controller here, is we're going to say that the view controller takes in a dependency of something. I'm going to go ahead and call it, let's go ahead and call it data fetchable. And you might have seen this able suffix in different cases that Apple themselves use. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to declare, not defend, a protocol. And this protocol is basically going to be called data fetchable. And I'm going to go ahead and stick in the same function signature that we used in the API caller. So you guys are probably getting where I'm going with this. And we're going to go ahead and put this right inside of here. We're going to also have an instance member of this on this class, just like that. And we're going to say self.dataFetchable is dataFetchable. We're going to go ahead and say super.init. This is going to be nil. This is going to be nil. When you override that initializer, we're going to want to have to declare the required initializer here as well. Let's go ahead and set a background color here to system background. And the coolest part about this is the view controller doesn't know that the API caller is where the call is going to originate. We're just going to pass it in via the protocol here. So what that actually looks like is as follows. So back here in the main view controller, we need to pass in a data fetchable. And if you don't see the actual signature update, it's because Xcode is just being dumb. So go ahead and hit Command B. Let's make sure we don't have an issue here. Let's see what's going on. So this VC is yelling at me, so it looks like that went away. We have an error somewhere. Let's go ahead and take care of it. So here we have done JSON serialization. This requires the try keyword since it can throw an error. And you're going to see an error here once again because we updated this constructor. So here we need to pass in a data fetchable. So let's see, the reason we don't see it here is because we need to mark the constructor as public, which I forgot to do. So we'll go ahead and do that as public. We made that required public already. Let's jump back to our view controller. And inside of here, we're going to want to say Command B so it compiles the updated code again. And let's see, it's still not being happy. So let's see what's going on here. Let's come back here and let's see what is up. So I'm going to come back to this. Looks like we have a public initializer, data fetchable. That looks good to me. We can go ahead and leave this as internal. We don't necessarily need that to be, public. Let me go ahead and comment this out. Sometimes you just require a Command B for Xcode to make your code available to you. There it is. And now we need to pass in something that is data fetchable. So there's a couple ways you can go ahead and do this. We can go ahead and say API caller.shared as data fetchable. And basically this is going to try to take the API caller and downcast it. And you're going to see that the argument is going to be A, it's going to be optional, and B, it's saying the API caller doesn't in fact conform to data fetchable. So what we can also go ahead and do is say via an extension, I'm going to do it up here, via an extension, API caller, it is data fetchable. Now, API caller already conforms to the particular function internally that we are passing inwards here. So now we don't even need to cast it because it is already data fetchable. So that's the basic meat of dependency injection. We use the protocol to bridge the API kit as well as my app UI kit. And the beautiful thing about this is it doesn't impact your build times once you start getting into really large scale projects. And this is a pattern very commonly used by very large applications to avoid really ridiculous dependency issues. So now that we have the dependency in here, we can go ahead and say data fetchable and we can call that function. And what's awesome about this is the fact that the data fetchable is agnostic of API caller, right? It doesn't know, the view controller here does not particularly know API caller is a thing that is providing this functionality. So without further ado and me, going over more theory, let me go ahead and hit that play button and let's see what this actually looks like in practice. Now bear in mind, in our API caller, we are only printing out the JSON as of now. So we're going to want to go ahead and convert that into a single dimension array of our course names. But let's go ahead and tap on this and make sure we see our controller. So we definitely see our controller, and here is the JSON that we are getting back. So what we want to do is, for each of the elements inside of here, we want to go ahead and just simply grab the name. So let's go ahead and do that. Instead of actually doing an array like this as well, the other thing you can go ahead and do is you can use another protocol to declare a model. So instead of using just JSON, you can actually decode it to something appropriate. Now, how do we go ahead and do that? Once again, you would do a similar thing where you declare a protocol in one of the modules and you bridge it to the other. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to do it this way. So let's go ahead and convert this dictionary into our single list. So we'll go ahead and say this result should have a collection on it. So let's go ahead and print out from the results each of these. So it has a collection. So let's go ahead and see what we end up getting here. So this JSON, I'm going to call this JSON as well, down here and down here. And let's see what we actually get. So it looks like it doesn't want to cooperate. So let's just go ahead and try that one more time. Sometimes autocomplete is a utter mess and you need to guess your way through it sometimes. So let's go ahead and do that. We definitely make the API call. We get our data back here. And it looks like this is giving us an array as the root, and each of these is a dictionary within its own right. So let's go ahead and explicitly declare that here. It's an array of dictionaries. Let me make sure that it's actually correct. So it looks like here it is yelling at me because this is trying to force cast. So instead, let's go ahead, and if I do JSON here, what you're going to see is its type is any. So what we actually want to go ahead and do is cast it optionally. So we're going to go ahead and make this an array of dictionaries like that. And I'm going to go ahead and print out json.count. That way we'll verify that we're getting n number of course objects back when I hit the button here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and we get 7 objects back. I'm also going to go ahead and do a guardlet here, so we drop the optionality since it's slightly annoying. And if we don't actually get the JSON back, we're going to go ahead and say call the completion handler with a empty array. The next thing that we want to go ahead and do here is get the names. So names is going to be our JSON, and we're going to go ahead and map this. We can go ahead and actually say compact map, which will take care of our optionality. And we're going to say from this, get the thing with the name key. And we already know that it is going to be of type string since we've explicitly declared that up there. Finally, let's go ahead and print out names here. I'm also going to go ahead and call completion handler and put names in here as well. We can explicitly declare this as an array of string as well. Let's go ahead and give it a run one more time. Make sure we're getting the proper thing back when we go ahead and hit this. And let's see, it looks like we in fact are. Here is our collection. We can get rid of this print here, and the last thing left to do is actually hook up the UI here in the other module. So in the view controller, we're using data fetchable to actually make this fetch. And once we have this information here, we can create a model that is internal to this My App UI kit. So I'm going to go ahead and call this a course. And a course is going to have a name, of course, no pun intended. And finally, what we'll want to go ahead and do is create a collection on here of that type of model. So we're going to go ahead and say courses is going to be an array of course, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and map this now. So we're going to say self.courses. Courses is going to be courses, and this is the one that comes back from the API. Let me actually call it names so it's not confusing. Dot map, and we're going to go ahead and map this to a actual course model. where we're going to pass in the name as $0. Now we don't want to cause a memory leak, so we're going to capture self in a weak capacity, just like that. And the last thing left to do here is actually update the table view, which we still haven't created yet, on the main thread. So let's go ahead and create that table view, and then we'll see the whole end-to-end thing in the simulator. And if you guys have any questions while I'm doing this, we've got the dependency injection part down already. Don't hesitate to drop it down below in the comments. I know this video was a little all over the place, but hopefully you guys got the idea. This is a question that I get quite often, how dependency injection works. And there's a variety of flavors out there of dependency injection. There's also things like, I believe it's called Swift inject or Swiftject. And there's, different ways you can model dependency injection, but the point being is it's a very, very powerful pattern that's used for large-scale apps that you should definitely get familiar with sooner rather than later when you want to work, or if you want to work on large-scale applications and create architectures that are scalable. So we're going to go ahead and just implement a basic table view here. I'm not going to speak to it too much since I've got many other videos on table views and it's not really the main purpose of this video, but we're going to conform to the data source and delegate like one does when setting up a table view. We added it as a sub view. We also want to make sure we give this a frame. So I'm going to go ahead and say view to layout subviews. The table has a frame of Table view has a frame of view.bounds, which will be the entire view controller. Number of rows here is going to be the courses.count, and finally cell for row at index path is going to basically be a cell that we will dequeue from the table view with the reuse ID of cell that we registered right up above. I'm going to go ahead and return said cell. Cell.textLabel text is going to be the name of the course at the nth position. So we'll say courses indexpath.row.name. So hopefully it didn't go through that too quickly. Let's go ahead and give this a run, make sure it works, and then I'll speak to the dependency injection part one more time before we completely wrap it up. All right, there's our app. We've got this pretty cool looking button here. It says to tap it, so I'm going to go ahead and tap it. And what happened? Where is our table? Well, what happened is I forgot to say table view reload data. So we're going to go ahead and say self.tableview.reload data, and make sure you wrap it in this main async block so it occurs on the main thread, the main queue, as one should do for UI. Go ahead and open it up, and here is our list of courses. So cool, so it definitely works. Let's talk through the dependency injection piece one more time. Hopefully it wasn't fuzzy for everybody, but we've got two targets here, right? We've got API kit, and we've also got my API UI kit. You guys can ignore the test folders. They're just unit tests associated with each target. The API kit has a class that is capable of fetching a collection of course names. And this is a signature of this function, right? Fetch course names with a completion handler. Now this actually takes care of doing all the fetching. Now our view controller in its initializer takes a dependency of something that's data fetchable. And this is a protocol which says I need something that can fetch courses or fetch course names and have a completion handler with an array of strings. So what we do in the main target, whoops, not the main storyboard, in the main target in the view controller, we have access to both the API kit and the my app UI kit. So what we do is when we instantiate courses view controller, we pass in API caller shared. But how does this know that API caller shared is data fetchable? Well, we tell it by conforming right here via an extension that API caller, you are in fact data fetchable, and the reason it doesn't give us an error that API caller doesn't conform is because Swift is smart enough to know internal to API caller, we actually do conform. So you don't need to have the protocol reference in here. And the last thing that I'll show you, which is a little out of scope, but slightly relevant, is if you take a look in your main build settings here, you'll see that your DI project depends on API kit and my app UI kit. And then right below that, you've got API kit, and look at that, it doesn't depend on my app UI kit. And similarly, my app UI kit does not depend on API kit. So you are essentially injecting the functionality from your API kit into my app UI kit. I feel like I just said kit 20 million times, so if you haven't dropped a like down below, if not for the video, drop it for me saying kit a million times. But that's all I've got for you guys today. A pretty interesting topic. Let me know if you guys want to see more. If this wasn't clear for any reason, drop a like down below, subscribe for more. Comments if you've got any questions. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one.